All right, welcome everybody. My name is Justin Grote. I'm a data center solutions architect with Allied Digital. Today we're going to be talking about PowerShell feedback providers. Feedback providers are a new feature that's been new into PowerShell 7.4. It's actually still currently an experimental feature, but what they will allow you to do is they will allow you to provide certain kinds of feedback for the results of commands for users. So they can be very useful for a lot of things, and we'll go about what those aspects are about being able to contribute more and help guide users to better solutions. I got a little bit of a tickle in my throat for some reason today, so I apologize if I cough a little bit here. So, first off, why is that not advancing? Let's try this again. I know why it is, because there we go. So thanks to the sponsors, as usual, they make this thing happen. They make it so I can see my friends, and I always appreciate that. Yeah, but all these are like really great products. We use some of them within Allied Digital and such, and I'm very happy to have them. And of course, thank you to Allied Digital specifically. That's my company. They sponsored my travel so I could be here, so thanks so much to that. We're a global MSP. We manage IT departments. We do all kinds of Azure. We do all kinds of stuff. So if you need anything possibly in IT and you want a team full of people like me, give us a call. So as far as feedback providers go, I always like to start with the why. So what is the point of taking the time to learn how to make feedback providers and either integrating them into modules or providing modules that provide them? So what feedback providers do is they allow you to provide a little bit of extra information for any kind of command, whether it's successful or failure, and be able to help empower users to sort of self-solve their own problems. So if there's a particular error that you know, oh, we know that when you see this error, you need to log in, or you need to you forgot to set up this other thing, or have you considered, checking all this information? You can pop up a little message that can give that user that information. So it's not that complicated of a thing, but it's pretty powerful because you're able to utilize what's called the abstract syntax tree, as well as all of the information that's in that exception to customize and modify your message to be able to present to a user. So they can be used for things like a very common one that is in the extension. In PowerShell 7.4, once you enable the feature, is one called the command not found provider, which is one that if you type a command and it can't find it, this is a feedback provider that's been written to sort of do a fuzzy search and find maybe what the command you were thinking of, and then it'll pop up a little thing with the feedback provider saying, hey, did you, if you type grep, it's like, hey, did you mean grep, and so that kind of a thing makes it really useful to help guide, especially new users, to get better information and be able to work better and solve their problems faster without having to resort to trawling the web and spending 2 hours and finally realizing they mistyped something, which I've never done. When you get to my level, like that never happens. So you'll be fine. Yeah. So these are for beginners, right? Yeah. And one other thing too is you can always also suggest better practices because you can write feedback providers based on the success of an output. You could, a command could be completed, but for instance, you could have a command where they do something and it has like a bunch of really short aliases in it. And maybe the user doesn't actually even know what the full commands are for those. So they could install your, aliases reminder feedback provider module. And whenever they use an alias, it can pop up and say, hey, maybe you should try using the full version of the command. And here's the full version of the command that you used at this point in the script. So that's pretty much the core of what they are. So they are basically a PowerShell interface, or excuse me, a C# interface that you implement. So this is from the docs, which are linked there in the slides, which I'll bring up. But you just Google how to create a feedback provider. It'll be like the first result. And so the way that this works is that they're a function of the console host in PowerShell. So this is something that happens at what is sort of the UI level of the PowerShell. If you don't know this, there's the PowerShell core, and then there's the PowerShell host. And the host is like what translates what's going on in the PowerShell engine and shows it to you on the screen. So if you're in Windows Terminal or if you're in the command line, you get the default console host. But there are other hosts you can implement. For instance, Visual Studio Code has its own special host because of the way that it does that fancy client-server stuff that Andy talked about yesterday. There's hosts that, for instance, if it runs in a web server, to be able to take any of the information records and stuff and output that in a certain way or convert it to HTML or that kind of a thing. So that host layer has to implement the ability to display this feedback. And as of today, the VS Code one doesn't. So The biggest thing I'll do is as you're writing these, don't test them in the PowerShell extension window. Test them in a fresh PowerShell window, because as of today, they don't work in VS Code. We're going to get that wired up, but as of today, it doesn't work, mostly because this is still an experimental feature. So once you have the PowerShell engine, what happens is that somebody does something in PowerShell, and then what will happen is that then it'll come down here and it'll do that get feedback. So your function will get a call to it saying, excuse me, your C# class will get a call to it saying, hey, we want, the user did this thing, and did you want to provide feedback? And then it's your option in the code through this iFeedback provider for your module down there at the bottom. First you register your module, that's just a ceremony thing. But then once you implement the interface, then every time something happens in the code that is relevant to you, because you can register, I want to register to only run my code like if it's an error, or run my code regardless, so I can always check and then just skip it. Then you can see everything going on in the AST, what the commands user did and what his last error was, and then return an object that basically provides all the information to provide a suggestion. The thing about this too is that due to the nature of how the thing works, and so that it doesn't lock up the console, there is I believe it's an 80 millisecond limit. I think it was up from 20. But basically, you have to do this very fast. So there's no you shouldn't use this for to try to go fetch a ChatGPT answer, because by the time it comes back, it'll have timed out and it'll look like your thing had done nothing. So that's one thing you do really have to keep in mind when you write these, is that there's a hard limit, and there's no warning to you that, hey, your feedback provider hit the hard limit. It's just your thing will just fail for no reason with no feedback, ironically. And so it just won't work, and if it's just because you went over that 80 milliseconds. So anything you do with this, it's very similar to the predictive, if you want to write your own predictive source plugin, those have to be under 20 milliseconds. So whatever kind of evaluation you're doing, probably shouldn't try to do anything online. You should have whatever data you need, knowledge base or whatever, should be local, or you should have a command that first fetches and pre-caches that locally, so that when your feedback provider is running, it should only be grabbing any of that kind of local stuff. So we're just going to go straight to demos. That's my dog Spock. So back to that article here. Oh, man, I bet this is my fault. One second. It is 100% my fault. There we go. So this is the article that I referenced earlier. And what this goes through is this explains the whole process. So you'll start a C# class, and there's that diagram I showed earlier. So you start a new class library. You do all the fun C# stuff here. You implement an init class, so that this is for when it joins. It onboards and removes. And then you add all these class members so that you have your class, and then you implement the aspect so that this implements that feedback provider aspect. And then you add your suggestions, using the AST or whatever. And then you can do a try get alias. And then if you need to do a suggestion for failure, you can do that. And then finally, you add in the part that actually has for the feedback tie-in and put that in. Simple, right? Okay. So if you're not a C# developer, I get it. This is a wall of I have no idea what's going on here. So what we're going to cover a little bit later is I will show you I made a module that lets you write these in PowerShell. So just keep that in mind when we get to that point. So I'm going to go through a lot of the kind of guts of this, just so you can kind of see what the internals work. Don't worry about not understanding it. It'll just give you an idea of what's going on under the scenes. But then I will show you a module that I made where you basically just feed it a script block. So, but once, if you want to do those, or for instance, if your module is already written in C# and you're like, oh, I want to provide a certain amount of feedback for something that I'm doing. Say you're making API calls and they go to connect and they've forgotten to include a certain, you're expecting a certain environment variable to be there. And your module normally, you don't want to present, you don't want to throw an error, but you want to give them a note. It's hey, for the future, you might want to set this environment variable. It could make your script run better. Otherwise, add this thing and you'll never see this message again. But that's where the feedback providers can become important if you are a C# developer, if you are writing your PowerShell modules as binary models. Yeah. Yes, it does. So it has a registration. So sorry, the question was, does it support multiple feedback providers from multiple responses from multiple feedback providers? And the answer is yes. What happens is that it has a registration function. So when you write your when you write your, and we'll show that with the script feedback provider. When you write your feedback provider, you register it as part of the process. So you'll register it, it'll have a unique ID. And as those are registered, basically, when it's time for feedback, it just kind of loops through the ones that are registered. But if each one returns a result and you can return multiple results, then all those results get aggregated at the end. And it's got this nice little like hierarchical look to it. So in fact, I'll go ahead and just show an example here. The time limit is per provider. So your provider needs 20 milliseconds. The next, or 80, actually, what is it, Stephen? Is it 80?
It's 100 milliseconds.
Is it 100? Oh man, that's luxurious. Yeah, I know those were 20. I thought it was, anyhow. So yeah, so I've been saying 80, it's 100. It may change in the future, but in short, basically like for your provider, for the one, when your get feedback method is called, you have 100 milliseconds to complete that before it just silently drops you and moves on. Like most of my ones that I do, because all they do is basically like parse the AST and look for issues, like some of the ones I'll demo here, like they generally complete in like less than 2 milliseconds. So like as long as you're working locally, you know, if you got to make a query to database, if you got a little SQLite thing, as long as you can do whatever you're doing within, you know, 100 milliseconds, then it's, you know, again, in computing time, that's actually a good amount of time as long as what you're doing isn't bound by like trying to make a network call or something like that. So you can get a lot done if you have some sort of like offline database. Like an example of this could be is like there are certain errors that you in your internal company, you know, there are certain issues. So like if you have a fast enough local network that you could make a query out to a small database that could return fast enough, you could have something like the most common like help desk things you have or the most common errors that happen. You could have something always watching for those. And when it comes up, you're like, oh, you know, we know why this happens. Go see this internal knowledge base article and literally have that just come up in the console after the person has typed it. And just like, oh, okay. And they'll have their hyperlink and they can click it and then be like, oh, okay, that's how I fix this kind of thing. So as an example, do I have it loaded here? I do. So I have, this is a little bit of a spoiler for the script feedback provider. So I have this one that's for recommended actions. And so this is a very simple one that if I write an error typically, you know, everyone knows what that looks like. But say I have a script for something and if you don't know this, write error has this parameter called recommended action. And this, you know, in my opinion, because this was never really like exposed in errors and there is a pull request by me that's been like sitting there for 4 months, no shade, you know, that hopefully it will get merged here as I keep harassing Steve about. You know, since like PowerShell 3, this property has been on error records where you can put in and say like, you know, hey, you know, maybe there's a good way to solve this issue. But it never gets surfaced, so nobody ever uses it because it's not surfaced anywhere in PowerShell by default. So I made a feedback provider that surfaces it. And so what this feedback provider does is like when there's an error, all it does is it looks at the error, and if there's a recommended action, then it returns the result as that recommended action. So if I do this, you'll see now I get this little bit of extra text there. And so it has, all of this is customizable, but the way that I wrote it was that the top part is I wanted it to be error recommended action, so you know where it's coming from. And so for your thing about when there's multiple, then you just see this in that way. And if different feedback providers all have the same header, then they all consolidate under that. And of those sections where there's the little extra caret, that's not me doing any kind of fancy formatting. That's actually built into the parser. So you sort of have these 3 levels of things that you can say, where it's your provider title, and then there's the topic, and then there's individual items under that topic. You can structure that however you want, and then all of that gets merged together to then finally present to the user. So here's an example. Again, so when I have a recommended action, here I have where I have that, and just to prove that this is doing it dynamically, you see the updated based on whatever my recommended action was. Yeah, so the question is as far as like where is recommended action found? Yes, so recommended action is when an error record is generated, if recommended action has been specified, which very, very, very few things actually do when they make an error record, you have to actually, you know, because you have to actually do, you know, how many of you even knew this parameter existed? You know, yeah, exactly, thank you very much. So, and then if you're doing it in C#, it's even less obvious. So the people who write the AZ modules, the MG modules, you know, like this isn't a thing, and they're also not going to bother with it because it's not surfaced unless you actually go looking for it. So I am on a crusade to change that, but we'll see how that goes. So the way that works in terms of that is that, but yeah, in fact, I'll show you right here. So that did actually error. I can do error 0 or get error kind of a deal. I don't know if that's actually on the default get error properties, but sorry? Yeah, it is. So it is. I was just looking to see if it was on like the default view. So you have the error record itself, and then I think that was my action preference stop exception. Yeah. There we go. And error details. I don't know why that's not auto-completing. Yeah, so then error details is just an object here that has properties that are message, and then there's that recommended action. So this is where like that gets surfaced, and so if it's there, and a fun trick, like you can edit these error details. Like one of my common patterns is like if I get an error and it's like obtuse, then I'll go in and like in my try catch for that, in my catch, I'll actually go in and rewrite the error details message to be more descriptive. But that doesn't change that part is mutable, but the rest of it is not. But if I do that, it still preserves the stack trace and all the other information about the error. But I'm able to give the user, like, I'll probably take the original error and then effectively do like what recommended action here does, which is give them a little more information, like have you thought about trying this? Or this usually happens because this, or that kind of a thing. So because recommended action isn't typically surfaced, I've just been appending that to message. But hopefully in the future, like this is by default. But again, the point here being is that this was something that didn't exist, and I was able to make a module that surfaces that. So if we go over to what that looks like, well, first what we'll do is we'll start with one that I made that is for where did it go? It's probably in my other window. I'll probably start it over. Okay. So I made a module called MGAQ Detect, and it stands for Microsoft Graph Advanced Query Detect. Who here's used the Microsoft Graph module? Who here's ever tried to use like dash search and then it blows up horribly, and then you spend like 3 days like, why does this not work? And I think they have better messages now, but basically like because of the way that the Graph API works and the way they implement it, you also have to add dash consistency eventual dash count variable CV or whatever. So, and if you forget to do that, it's not always obvious. Like it doesn't always error. Sometimes you just won't get the results you're looking for, and you're just like, what is going on here? So I made a feedback provider that detects all the situations where that happens. Let's see. There is an article about it. Microsoft Graph Advanced Query. Yeah, this one. So they list out here all these scenarios with very specific properties when you have to use the extra consistency level eventual. So, so you can go back in this and try to remember when this happened, or you can just use my module. I went through and I implemented a feedback provider that looks for when you've done any one of these scenarios in the graph commandlet. For any commandlet, like because you're able to just work against the AST, for any commandlet, it looks for that and finds out if you are doing one of these where it requires advanced parameters, it'll tell you, hey, you probably need to add consistency eventual and count variable to it. So let's hopefully see if that works. This will be a magic trick. Is my tenant still connected? Come on. Yay, sweet. Okay. So if I do get MG user search, like display name OK. So here's an example. So they're getting much better about this where they have that. And oh, look at that. They actually have recommended action on this one. Hey, good for the graph team. It's not a very helpful one, but at least it's there, So this is an example of my recommended action feedback provider. Like I didn't jump out of this yet. So again, it doesn't matter what the code is. All it does is it looks at the error. Does the error have a recommended action property? And if so, surface it. And we'll look at a little bit of what that code looks like here in a bit. Using my script back feedback provider, this is much simpler than it sounds to implement. I think you'll be surprised how simple it is. So if I import my DMG, and this should be out on the gallery. I'm just doing my local one that I have here. GAQDetect.psd1. So on import, if I do this again, okay, so now that I did it, notice when I did this search, it didn't work, but now I have an additional recommendation from my Microsoft Graph Advanced Query that says the following command combinations were detected as needing advanced query capabilities. Ensure you add dash count variable, count bar, and consistent level eventual to these commands, or you may get unexpected results or empty results. And then I find in the AST, where that issue was. So if you have like a full script, this thing will repeat over and over and over again all the places where you screwed up and forgot to put the advanced query filters. So To me, this was like a perfect example to implement feedback providers, because this is something that people mess up all the time. This is one of those like null's always called like the $2 billion programming mistake. And like to me, like this is like the null of Microsoft Graph, because it's just, we've argued about it a whole bunch on the forums, like you should just enable this by default. They don't want to do it, and so you just have to remember this. But it's so unintuitive and doesn't inform you that there's so much. I can't imagine how much IT productivity of people suffering in silence who don't post on forums at all, trying to figure out like why their query only returned 3 people instead of the 12 they were expecting. And it was just because they forgot those extra 2 parameters. Yeah. So the question is that this seems a lot like Script Analyzer, and give the man a hand because I 100% agree. And for more on that, there's a guy in the back of the room there named Steven, and he's the one you're going to want to talk to complain about that, and also because I agree. So a little bit, that's kind of one of my wrap-ups, is that yes, in my opinion, there's a lot of overlap between this and Script Analyzer, and this is still an experimental feature, so it can evolve as it goes forward. So like my opinion is that you should just be able to take Script Analyzer rules and just add an attribute to them to make them feedback providers, if they were relevant to be in that sort of interactive way. But it shouldn't be having to reinvent the wheel when we already have a framework for doing like analysis. It's a little more complicated because Script Analyzer doesn't really have any kind of mechanisms or anything built into it to analyze like errors in real time. It's more about static analysis of code. But that doesn't mean we can't make a new interface that builds on the old interface that exposes additional things for that. So a Script Analyzer can implement support for that and then very quickly be able to just be registered as a feedback provider. So that's my opinion of how it should go. There's complications with that. I don't have all the challenges that Steven has, so it's easy for me to pie in the sky, say what it is. But I agree with you. So you will see a lot of overlap with like Script Analyzer. But the good news there is that if you've written Script Analyzer rules before, if you've tried that, if you've messed with the AST at all, then this will look very, very familiar, and it'll be really easy for you to write them as they are today. All right, so let's go to, we're doing pretty good. So here's an example of that graph feedback provider. So the key thing is that, so again, this is all C#. If you don't understand C#, don't worry about it. We're just gonna hop through this real quick. So I have a class, and this class implements an interface, which is basically a contract saying an application can say, hey, I want you to implement this stuff in a standard way, and then you can work with me. And so if I go to this, you'll see there's basically just a couple things here. One of which is that you have a trigger, which is basically when you register it, is basically do you want to trigger on all messages, like success or not, every command the person runs, or do you only want to get notified when there's an error so that your code isn't wasting time looking for things. And then finally, the only other thing you have to do is implement this method called getFeedback. You are provided a feedback context, which we'll go into here in a second, and you're provided a cancellation token, which just simply means that if your code, even though it's only like 80 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds that you get, if the user hits Control-C or otherwise cancels, that control token is just something you should be checking, that if that thing switches to cancel, that means the user hit Control-C or something needs to cancel your process, and you should bail out of whatever, like if you're querying a local database or whatever, and again, probably most of the time, like, it's not gonna make a meaningful difference, but it's there so that, again, just to make it as fast as possible. So even just like that little bit of extra milliseconds doesn't make the user feel like everything is slow. So inside a feedback context, which is probably not gonna let me go to because my VS Code C# is not very happy about this. So I could probably go find this on GitHub, but basically within a feedback context is you're gonna have what the script was that the user ran as a property. You're also going to have what the last error the user encountered, if any, if there was an error, as another one. Now, one enhancement I've said is that it's only the most recent error. You can't see a chain of errors. So like if this is in a script and it's like down here, there might be some additional errors that happened in previous commands that might be useful for you to provide a feedback provider. As of today, you can only see the very most, like basically $error, 0. You can only see the most recent error that occurred. So hopefully we'll be able to see more than just that and see like more context for a script, but as of today, you'll only see the most recent error that the user ran into. And so then based on that, you return a feedback item, which again, it probably won't let me go to. These are all in the VS, as you can see here up here, this decompilation. It's pulling it out of the PowerShell source code itself. So you can go to the PowerShell source code and see like how all these are implemented. And usually this go-to works and you can see the detail, but my stuff's busted. So that feedback item is what you return, and basically you're returning information about what your feedback provider is, what it should, what the response is to the user, like that info that I showed there, and any additional detail that you need to do. And that's basically all feedback provider is. It's just implementing this one method in the end. But there's a lot more involved. There's some ceremony that you got to do in terms of registration. So once you have that, so here's my inspection process for the graph error thing. And basically we have a message, a statement, and I'm just going through here. And I have kind of quick filters, like, if the error didn't say bad request, most of the time it's not going to be relevant. So again, I quickly fail out of the path and just check that target object. In the object of a graph failure, it has information about the query. So I'm basically looking, like in this case, if you had a filter and you had count, then return that particular error. And this just goes through all those different scenarios that were on that list. This is just kind of checks each one of those and hops through them and does, checks like order by has a thing. If the parameter has order by, then you need to return, hey, you need to do the extra stuff. So this isn't too complicated, but you can see here's that script block stuff and the AST searching and blah, 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 blah. But in the end, that's ultimately happens there. And then I've got some extra stuff down here in terms of all the strings saved, as well as then there's this part. This is a special thing with modules. There's just simply, this is something that just runs whenever the script starts up and closes down. And the only thing it's doing here is registering with the feedback provider. So again, a lot of ceremony, a lot of stuff. That's 158 lines just to do that. So I made one called Script Feedback Provider. So this is out in the gallery, and all you got to do, you can install it, but most of the time you won't be installing it directly. You'll be making a dependency on your module. So Script Feedback Provider does all the same thing as you saw there, but it sets up everything so that it can take a script block that you give it and do all the stuff so that you can return it. So if you're familiar with like writing argument completers or that kind of thing, I was following that model. Like I wanted you to be able to write feedback providers sort of like the way that you write argument completers. So again, you don't need to care about what any of this means. This is all the magic that happens behind the scenes, but if you're curious, you can go out and see the repository for it. And so the net result being is here is a module that I made. This is the module that runs that recommended action one that you saw. That's the code to do it. So if you want to do this, all you got to do is use my register script feedback provider command. You name your provider, and then in the script block, you're provided that feedback context object that I mentioned. And if you put the actual type on it, you'll get IntelliSense for that context object. So you'll be able to dot and see all the details. And then finally, you just return this feedback item object, which again is built into PowerShell 7. So you'll see this feedback context. Let's see where it is. You can see all the details of the properties and everything like that about it. So you can see those like directly. But for a new feedback item, if we go feedback item, new, I probably got it. I don't have this completing. So you'll see there's a few different ways you can do the constructor. But pretty much it comes down to a header and then a list of those action items. And we can go to like what those actions are just strings. And then you have an option for your layout in terms of like what you want to lay out, like vertically, you want to lay out horizontally. There's different kind of formatting things. And this is all in that article that I showed earlier. Again, we're kind of tight on time, so we're not going to spend too much time on it. But you have all these options for how you lay things out. So when I'm doing this, as you see, this is real simple. I take my context, and if the context.lastError, that's that special last error property that we talked about, and then the error details, which we saw earlier, recommended action, I'm just basically, if that exists, then okay, my feedback needs to provide it. So I create a new feedback item, the last error has a recommended action, and then output the results of that recommended action. So even without saving this as a module, let me make a new shell here. Do I have script feedback provider in my path? I do, okay. And just to show that that's actually doing something, so importing this, now I have 3 new commandlets. And so first, I'll just do get script feedback provider, so there's nothing up my sleeve. So right now, there's no script feedback providers registered. And so when you do register, we're just going to copy and paste that same thing that I did before. So now I've registered that feedback provider. If I do, so just by running that commandlet, in the background, it does all the stuff that you saw previously. I made a sort of scaffolding that does that registration step you saw in the C#, makes an instance of it that adds your code to the get feedback and does some magic in C# to make it run in a run space and all that kind of stuff. and then whatever your output is for that object to then have that result. And there's also some magic in there that like if you don't output the right kind of, you have to return that result item, but you can also just return a string. I've set it up so you can just return a string and it'll just assume that you wanted that as an action and it'll build the feedback item for you appropriately. But if you want it to be more reduced, if you want more detail, then you actually return an actual feedback item. I also made it so you can return a hash table. So like if you don't understand this whole class feedback item : new, then you can just return a hash table that has those two properties and it'll do that work for you too. So now I get skip feedback provider, and so there is that feedback provider that I made in that script block. And then I can just, again, do right arrow, and there's my feedback. So just to show there's no magic here, I'm going to get script feedback provider, and we're going to unregister that one. Of course, because I believe in everything being very PowerShell, everything's pipelinable. So the object's there, you can just pipe to unregister, and now we don't have a feedback provider anymore, and now that doesn't happen anymore. So now we can register a new one, but we could change this. Don't believe their lies. And now that I've registered that one, the last error has a recommended action. Don't believe their lies. Don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah, but that's just to show, it's like, again, what is in the script block, whatever you write in that script block, just like an argument completer or whatnot, ends up being your recommended action. So that's a lot easier than that wall of C#. And so it's a good thing that interface is there, especially if you're currently writing a C# module, because it makes it very easy to integrate that feedback stuff. But I wanted to add a little bit of extra tool. So again, this is something that just I wrote. This is not a PowerShell team thing. This is just a community project that I did to make it easier to write these feedback providers. All right, so to show the context there, I think the next thing I wanted to do was, I believe, and if I remember right, I did get debugging to work with these, but probably not. So let's find out. So I have this. If I throw a weight debugger in here, just out of curiosity. I should probably unregister the old one. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because that runs in a separate run space, you won't be able to debug them. But you can, for instance, like throw a, get that and unregister it. You can throw in a console log, and I think that'll work. But oops. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to use that console there to. I don't know why I'm doing this. What do you think from it? Yeah, we'll just do it here. So, and again, remember, the reason I'm not doing this, you can do this in VS Code, write them, and then run. Just make sure when you run, you do the run in a regular PowerShell window. If you try to do it in this window, the PowerShell extension terminal, as of today, watch if I register this and I do it, nothing's going to happen. And that's because it is actually working. It is all running. And if I put in that little console thing, that little console write line again, let me just do a new file here just to prove that. So if we take this one and we run it, oh wait, I think it actually has been short-circuited. No, so we didn't even make it this far. So so in the host, you have to implement. You have to basically in the PowerShell host itself. And this is all inside baseball, but when you're writing a PowerShell host, you have to subscribe to say, hey, I can handle feedback providers. Otherwise, they don't run, just for efficiency reasons. So hopefully in the VS Code extension, more specifically, the PowerShell editor services that runs under the hood, we just have to implement in the host there so that it registers saying, hey, I can display recommended actions, and then hopefully that'll start showing up here. But as of today, it doesn't. So that's why you want to do a separate terminal, which you can do it here, you can do it in the separate terminal, but again, just to show that it does work here. Hopefully, yeah. And so there it is there. And then, of course, harass Andy to make it work in the other one. All right, we're doing pretty good. We've got like, what, 7 minutes left? So I think at this point, I'll go ahead and just do a quick break for any questions. But as you can see, the main structure of these is that something's coming in, and you have a way to update the message, give the user better information, and then put them out. So the MGAQ detect, you can go out and install that module today. All you got to do is install the module and import it, and then just using Microsoft Graph, if you ever do one of those things where it's an issue, you will get that extra feedback. Oh, one very important additional thing, because this is an experimental feature, and I always forget this because in a new system, all of these are going to be false. So all you got to do is do get experimental feature, and you can do the specific one, and you can do enable experimental feature. And so just by doing that, then you have to restart your PowerShell, and then on your system, all those experimental features will be enabled for the remainder of the lifetime of that system. So until you do that, the feedback providers won't work. It's this third one, PS feedback provider. And in fact, so remember earlier when I was talking about that feedback provider? So this is one that the PowerShell team wrote. It's one that's right here, this PS command not found suggestion. So I just typed grip, and it just did sort of a fuzzy search, and it's like, hey, did you mean GIP? Or does this work with commandlets too, Stephen? Okay, so if I do like invoke wrist method. Yeah, so hey, did you mean invoke rest method, you typing idiot? So again, for most of us, for most people who are really advanced in PowerShell, a lot of these are still useful for things like I made that consistency level eventual mistake all the time. It drove me crazy because it's not obvious the scenarios. Now it's gotten better because, and at the time Microsoft Graph wouldn't give you errors. It would just error out. They've done better, and they made it so that they provide errors that point you in that direction from the API. But there's still a lot of scenarios where it still doesn't happen. When I was developing my Jazz PIM module, which is a way to do PIM elevations from the command line, ran into this all the time. It's so annoying. But here's an example. Just once this becomes sort of like a built-in feature, you look a few years into the future, having this sort of we've always been big about PowerShell being super friendly and accessible. And why we use descriptive names and words, why we use things like pipelining and stuff, why we use objects so you don't have to become a JQ wizard or an awk wizard. And this is just another thing that points in that mission, in that direction, where you can, for a user, if you're trying to figure out a command and you don't know how to use git command, or you don't know that you can tab complete, or you're just writing a script and you can't figure out why your script doesn't work and you're getting this weird message about command not found, you can get this little additional feedback here. So I see this feature as it grows and evolves being something that both really helps users, but kind of falls into, as was mentioned earlier, being sort of like a complement to script analyzer, ideally having the aspect of script analyzer rules. Imagine if rather than having to run invoke script analyzer all the time for your own scripts, you could have things like I said, like the existing rule that says don't use aliases. In my opinion, it should be pretty easy to just simply say, I want don't use aliases as a feedback provider, some commandlet set that lets you register those and put it in your profile. And that way, every time you use an alias, have the feedback provider come up and give you the same information that the script analyzer would have. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in that regard. So that's pretty much the summary of that. Let me get back down here to, I want to make sure Spock's on the screen and all this, something that's actually nice to look at. There we go. So at this point, I'll go ahead and take questions about feedback provider. Yeah. So the question is that you can, I mentioned that you can do things on success, and in fact, I do the MGAQ detect does work on success. So what happens is that the properties that you get is you get a property of whether it was successful or errored, a property that is the AST, that is the script that the person ran. So that script that the person ran is what you would do success tests against. So again, that's an example of alias. Is if they did, GC pipe question mark, brackets, whatever. That's a successful command. But your feedback provider would do get feedback, and you would be given this AST. You would see, oh, you used an alias here, so you can still report. Even though it was a successful command, you can report, hey, you might want to try expanding question mark to where object. You might want to try, and be nice to the next guy, kind of a deal. Yeah. So I think the thing actually, as of now, if it's a dot source script, and Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure today if it's a dot source script, all you get is the dot source, you get the dot source script that was run. It doesn't expand it. So you would have, but what you could do, like in that case, your feedback provider could go and then get the content of that script using GC and do a static analysis that way. But that's not built in, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, like while you're running the script, will you get the feedback?
Not so, no, because what'll happen is that the script will run, where it hooks in is at the end of a script execution. So yeah, if you're running like a 30-inch, if you're running like a 30-second long script that like had a loop in it and like did the graph thing and was using the wrong graph thing, it wouldn't show up in real time. It'll only show up at the end. But because you have all the context, like I mentioned there, is you can, where I showed like, here's the command, an additional thing I could have done is I could have shown like the script line and the script column, or made one of those like, I could have even used the fancy ANSI characters to like turn that into a hyperlink where you could have clicked it and gone to in your script where that particular one was. I just didn't get that fancy with that one so far. Good issue. File that as an issue on my own. Maybe I'll do it. Yeah. So for the record, there's Stephen Butcher's in the back of the room, and he's the PM on this particular feature, so he owns it. And so the thing was basically, the questions were about like if you're running a long script, the feedback providers sort of stream in real time, and they don't. And the main reason that Stephen mentioned was that in their design reviews, they didn't want to pollute your actual output of your script, where like you're actually going to care about your verboses or your warnings or your errors. And then this is just supposed to be output at the end, but that way it's easier to scroll up and not have all this wall of interact. It also has to do with the fact that because it also does that consolidation of all the feedback providers, then you would get a much uglier output than that nice consolidated view you get at the end. Yeah, yes it does. If you want to write a script feed, oh actually sorry. So that's one last thing that I forgot. So thank you. Let me get off there. We need to get back to work. So I actually published that so feedback.recommended action, this is published to the gallery. So you can download and install it. And in fact, I have a console here that has it available. And this module is just two pieces. It's your manifest, which you need for a module if you've never written a module before. And all you have to do is you have to just require the script feedback provider module. So that script feedback provider module, if you download and look at it, it's just a DLL. And that DLL provides the whole framework. So when you're writing a feedback provider, you can do this from a fresh PowerShell 7.4 console anywhere. You don't need the .NET framework. You don't need the SDK. You don't need any of that. You can write these ones just like you were writing an argument complete or something like that. All you got to do is tell your module to depend on that script feedback provider module, and then when it installs, it'll download the other one along with it. And when it imports, it'll load that first so that all your code will work. Yeah. I don't know, Stephen. Is there an item limit where it like truncates or? Sorry, the question was that if say like there's like 100 outputs, at the end you just get a garbage wall of console output at the end that you can't redirect or do anything with. And like I don't know if it like limits today. So Stephen's answer is there's not today, but the main thing is that because these modules are optional, because you again like the script feedback and stuff, you didn't see them actually work until I imported them. And so the idea would be you'd only import the ones that you want. And again, that dovetails again into, in my opinion, like the whole script analyzer discussion is like, you should be able to set in your profile with like a, enable command or something like that, the same things like you would enable with script analyzer with like a analyzer settings.psd1, kind of a deal. Yeah, so the examples Stephen gave was that the one feedback provider that ships in PowerShell 7.4, the way that it does is just put everything on a single line, which we'll just wrap. Again, you could still probably end up with a wall of text, but like there's ways obviously to structure your feedback provider so they aren't as noisy. Yeah. Oh, we're gonna get deep, are we? Okay. All right. This is the stuff I like. All right. Yeah. Okay. Tell me. Yeah. With the module, so if I recall, I have it warm up the run space pool. I don't remember. I think on my if I don't, I should. Is that when you import the module, it should be warming up the run space pool. And then it reuses that run space pool. So invoking it, your run spaces will have their own context. It clears out. Everyone else can go to your phones if you want, if you don't care about this part. I wipe the initial session state each time so that it doesn't carry over, so that you don't end up with state bugs. But it keeps the run space warm and the threads warm, so that I haven't actually tested like how much latency it has, but I can say like every script feedback provider I've run, I haven't run into a latency issue like where I've like been hitting the 100 millisecond limit. So good thing to test and file an issue if you're like, hey, this should be warmed up so that you don't get a cold start, false no report. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and end a little bit early then. Again, thank you very much. Actually, what we could do, I guess, if we have some time, if anybody thought of an idea of a feedback provider that maybe they want to see me try to do live right now, we could try it. Yeah. I mean, I could write a feedback provider that if you use send mail message says don't do that. You want to try that? Let's try it. So let's see. So if the context, I have to remember here. So ultimately, we'll just get to our end result is, well, let's make this quick. In fact, let's try it with just the, just to make sure the feed my example here. So you should just be able to just return a string and say, all right, there we go. All right, so again, so this, I always like to kind of start really simple just to make sure my output's working, and then we'll actually add in the filter to look for it. So we'll do that, and so I should be able to register that here. And so now this, oh, I forgot. And so this also, you can set an additional parameter on this registration in addition. So you can set in addition to like the description and that kind of thing, so that the description is what shows. I have a default description, but if you want to give a description, it'll show in that get feedback provider. But here on this trigger, the trigger is where you select it. So you can either do it on command not found, which is very specific to one particular provider because they wrote it. And so of course their thing is native in it. Error or success. So the default with my registration is error, because most of the time that's what we're doing. In this case, we're going to actually want to specify it on success. So let me again just get script feedback provider and unregister everything that's already there. Okay, so even on that command, I registered it. It registers before the command completes. So ultimately, like, this is the output that we want, right? Send mail message, reality check. Use send mail message. Don't do that. Think of the children. Use mail as are and make the world a better place. So then, our context, and I'm gonna have to go. This is why I wrote my own README, so this will be helpful. So if you go to the GitHub, Justin Grote, script feedback provider, it has a whole article here that kind of explains the different ways you can return information. So you have your header, then your actions, multiple strings, and then what the context looks like. An example there, example on recommended action. And this example previously of just by outputting a string, you can, you don't even have to understand that whole feedback item thing. And it's like, all I did was output a string and it outputted that. It didn't get the cool little like arrow thing or any of that kind of stuff, but it worked. Okay, this is the one that I wanted. I want my IntelliSense trick. So if I get back here, where's the one? I lost track of where I was working on this. Must have been the other one. Oh, no. You can just go away now completely. Nope. This is what happens when I use like a demo version. It doesn't have all my fancy stuff, helps you find things. I'm just totally lost. Oh, here we go. Was I editing my, yeah, let's just not do that. Let's pretend I didn't just like live edit my actual module. Not like it's published or anything, but. Sorry? That's right, yeah. See, timeline would have saved me, yeah. So if you don't know about timeline, which is down here, and if you're working on a document, every time you hit save, it's the word autosave of everything in VS Code. If you don't even have a Git repository running, it will keep a history of every, so here you go, timeline. In addition to your changes, it'll also have all the Git history now, which is very new. So you can go back in history 5-6 months and see all of that right there in the timeline. But you don't have to be running Git. Like if you're just working on a local file in a folder, it will remember and save that stuff. It saves it in your local app data info. So very cool feature, like highly underutilized in my opinion, and has been there for a while. So yeah, definitely use that. All right, let's go back here. Let's see what we got. 5 minutes. So, because I honestly can't remember what's in the context block. Let's do this. You got time. 90 minutes. Is it?
You don't
Oops. All right. Well, then we're going to write a lot of feedback providers today. I was like, well, I know what happened because I thought Andy in my session yesterday was going to be 90. It was 45. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, I could have swore I had something that was 90 minutes. Well, whatever. Which is good because I cut a lot of content from this one, so we can just go back and do that stuff. All righty. So yeah, well, let's go ahead and write this guy. And so we got this. We got our message that we're going to return. And so the context. The tricky thing I'm trying to remember is with that. There's a way to add that I figured out to get the IntelliSense in there because I am terrible without IntelliSense. And so there's a way that if you add it there, thanks to Martin GC94, who is one of the greatest PowerShell contributors of the last year, he's added all this great autocomplete stuff that you now works. It's the autocomplete stuff all works in the PowerShell console, but because the way that we structured VS Code, as we talked about yesterday, is all that autocomplete stuff you get for free in VS Code because 98% of the stuff of the IntelliSense that you get in VS Code is just VS Code calling like get completion to PowerShell and getting a result from it. Yeah. I was about to do that, try to like console right line it out, and but for now I want to actually get this thing going. Now that I have a dearth of time, like might as well do it the right way, right? So let's get this feedback context here, and I could also oh no, that's not right. So if I'm right, this should. Yes, okay, great. So by the way, is there anybody who has never seen this using namespace thing and want to know what that means? Okay, if you've never done it before, it's kind of a whole, brings over from C#. It just makes it so like if you've ever written a script and you have in brackets and you've seen examples where it's like system management, automation, something, this just makes it so you can leave that part off. The equivalent if I didn't have this at the top is I could take it out, but then I have to do this. And I hate that. Like that drives me crazy, especially like if I have a bunch of parameters. Like it's so hard for my eyes. So I just tend to prefer this view. It's just more contextual for me. All right. And what's happening here is that since that feedback context is there, every time you type, VS Code is calling that get recommendation thing, and it knows it's just doing an AST thing, almost just like your feedback provider. It's looking at this code. It's like, okay, there's a using at the top. I'm in a script block. I'm at a parameter, and that parameter has a type before it. So since that parameter has been typed, I can know that this parameter has to have certain properties because it has a type. So I know that I can complete the properties on that type. So I have command line AST. So the command line, that's the easy one. That's just like the text version of what somebody wrote. Command line AST is the fancy tree. And so most of the time, like you can just use command line. We'll probably use it for this example. The command line AST gets into the abstract syntax tree example. And if you want some more on that, I did a PSConf presentation last year on the AST. There are much better ones out there too, but that's one as well. And it'll explain, it's basically just like an object representation of a script. It's when you write a script, it's how PowerShell takes just that blob of text that computers don't understand and turn it into an actual .NET object that breaks down like what a thing is in a parameter and that kind of stuff. And the nice thing about that is it makes it very easy to like do a structured search. So like the MGAQ detect, it doesn't do like a regex to find that you use search. It actually uses that breakdown structure to find that PowerShell knows this is a parameter, like dash search is a parameter and not like a operator, for instance. You could certainly use regex too. Like there's no reason you can't use regex, but the AST is so much more powerful because those hundreds of thousands, if not millions, lines of code that PowerShell has to take that text and turn it into a PowerShell script gets done for you automatically. And now you can just reap the benefits of that rather than having to reinvent the wheel with regex. Or whatever you want to do if you don't even want to do regex. So you have your command line, you have your command line AST, you have your tokens, you have your current location, which is where in the script the error was found. And then you also have the last error, which has the script stack trace. And then you have for the trigger. So again, the trigger, if you were doing a success thing, you can register for more than one trigger. Like you can register for success, error, command not found. And then you could just like have a quick bailout here. Like if it's not error, I don't care. Most of the time you wouldn't do that. Most of the time you would just only register to say only show me the errors, and then you don't need that logic in your script, and it's not wasting cycles. So in this case, we should be able to do context.command line. The simplest example will just be dash like. We'll do match. Send mail message. I tend to like to do the return to be explicit so that I don't just leave lines in my code. I like return and write output. There's arguments about this either way, but if you want to do it now without, that's fine. So now we got this one here, and let's go ahead and add a description to it too. Okay. So let's go ahead and deregister my existing one, and we will register that one. And so now first I'll do, so notice it didn't happen, so that's good. So now we're not getting our thing triggered, but if we do send mail message, I know there's more parameters I probably need from, whatever. All right, why did that not trigger? Context.command line dash match. Oh, good point. I think I can register. Did I have this set to be an array? No, that's not an array. That one. So you would have to register separate feedback providers. That's one thing that's also annoying that I filed a thing on. But let's see. Let's just do a. Yeah. It's like number one, thank you all. Number two, you guys know way more about send mail messages than you probably should at this point. Why are you not using MailAzar? There is. It's called MailAzar. It's great. All right, let's see. Oh, actually, I wonder if I do error action, it probably won't work. But yeah. All right, fine. We'll say let's just try error just for fun. Just to prove the point here. First, we will register it. Make sure it doesn't regularly trigger on errors. And then, are we actually even running? So this is where I did have a way to debug. So if you're doing this in C#, what you would typically do is that if you're like debugging these, you would be able to put a breakpoint in your code, and then when you run the feedback provider, once it's imported, it'll breakpoint at this point so that you can troubleshoot and figure out what the heck's going on. Unfortunately, with this discrete feedback provider, there's not really, because it runs in a separate run space, there is technically a way to make that work, but man, it's a pain. So instead, what we do is we're just pretty much just gonna have to do the old write line method. I doubt write host works because that should get filtered by the thing, but usually write line's my go-to like get in there. So we'll try the command line. Hurt. And I'm bad at typing so much. Why is it mad at me? Oh, I know why it's mad at me. And it's registered. Well, let's make sure there's just not something messed up in my Everybody gets to see my troubleshooting process. So I'm a big believer in always like, just cutting the box in half each time. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure there's just not something wrong with my feedback provider by just going back and we'll just try triggering just a simple error, and just making sure that it works on a basic error. Otherwise, then it might just be that something's not wiring up correctly with how I have it, and I won't be able to demo this, but we'll find out. So let's try registering this one. All right, well, looks like an issue to file. Let's try this. We'll do it, but we'll just put the thing in quotes as an example here. See, but I know the other one, now, whatever. That's true, yeah. I mean, we can dive deep, so let's see here. Let's register. That's still showing, right? Okay, so let's just try. Well, now nothing's working. This is the end of the world. It could be that the trigger's not registering correctly somewhere in the core of my code. I mean, I do want to be clear too, is that with MGAQ detect, I wrote lots of pester tests. Like I'm very proud of that. Look, I got all these, and I even got them in C#. Like, I was a good boy. I did my tests. I can't. I mean, it shouldn't cause an issue. The only thing would be is that and the other thing too is like it comes in as an argument, so you can also just reference that. I'll just reference arg0. You can do that too. Like that's another way you can reference it if you need the info. And at this point, I'm not using it. I mean, yeah, we could take it out. We can simplify this all the way back and figure out where our individual problem is here. Actually, before I do that, I can save it, and then we can timeline it back. This is not, why is it saying it's a C# file? Oh, it probably saw the using at the top, and it's like, oh, you went all clippy on me. It looks like you're writing a C# file. Let's name this panic demo. There we go. All right, so we will. I'm surprised nobody's called me out for not splatting this yet.
That's my job.
Yeah. All right. So let's close this. Let's get a fresh. Oh, I'm going to be so upset if I've been doing this the whole time and I was doing the exact thing that I said I wouldn't, which is use the wrong PowerShell console. Yeah, I know. I did that on purpose. Let's do a net new one just to be safe. Let's do it in this one, I guess. Oh, oops. Well, now everything's broken. All right. I think it does. I think you're right. So I just make sure I'm using the right one here. Yeah, that's the one. So I'm just making sure I'm using the one that comes from the gallery and not my local one that I may have just edited just now and screwed up. So yeah, I believe I do need to do triggers. Why is that not completing? Oh, it's because I killed the, fine, you can come back. Be nice, don't let me. If you see me trying to run this in this console, yell at me. But I do want to have it there for my glorious IntelliSense. Andy worked so hard, I shouldn't let it go to waste. Oh, it's because it's not loaded here. One sin that I have not fixed that I realized I did last night is in my manifest for the script block for the script feedback provider, I forgot to explicitly name out the functions, so I just use star here. So it's always things like recommend don't do this, and the reason being is that the autocomplete doesn't work by default because PowerShell doesn't know the commands that are in there until it actually imports it. So that's why you do this, is that so that PowerShell can already know what commands are there without having to import the module and possibly run some code. So now that I have it imported, this should work now. Yeah. So trigger error. Go back here. You know, I'm just gonna make a function for this. Done enough times. Okay, so there we go. Things are wired back up again. So now let's see that still happens with send mail message. Good. And now we want our context. Let's first make sure it's showing what we want it to. And honestly, we could just output this as our error. Yeah, we'll need the param block. I can also use args. Thank you for the reminder. But we'll do the param block because I like param blocks. All right, bounce. Okay, so the command line is coming through. Send mail message, the command line is coming through. So now we shall try our approach again, figure out why it didn't work. Trying to think if there's something about the regex for the dash would be a problem, but let's just do like, just for fun this time. Bounce. And there we go. All right, so now we can, first of all, figure out, I don't know what I did different. I guess it maybe let's go back to our timeline here. Yeah, it could have been. So we'll go back to this guy. Well, let's also make sure it works with success. I demoed that earlier, but thank you all for troubleshooting my module for me. This is great. It's getting so much better. Okay, so let's bounce again. Oh, yeah, so it's probably, oh, but I'm not doing send mail message in the thing. Let's try. Okay, so success works, error works. At least we've covered that. I don't have anything strange going on there. So let's see. So we got this here. We'll go back to our original. So what are the differences here? Oh, I didn't save. Did I not save the original before I changed it? Dang it. All right, fine. Now I got to be pithy with my answers again. All right, so let's get out of all these weird difference windows. I have one of my settings in my VS Code is like it only allows up to so many tabs at the top, and then it just closes the older ones so that you don't end up with this nightmare. I can't remember the name of the setting, but it's a nice one. I think it's called like max tabs or something like that, max editors. I don't know, it's somewhere in here, but of those thousands of settings. But yeah, because I always end up with this like, which one of these is the right one? So I have it select it only shows like the first 3 or 4, and then unless if it's an unsaved editor, it won't close it. But if I'm clearly just clicking through files, it'll just close the oldest one if it hasn't been modified, unless I have it pinned by doing this with the pin option. All right, so we know this part works, and so we will. And also, well, I guess here's what we can do actually. Let's go ahead and register this thing twice. That's a good point. It could be because I had the type on there. There was a reason see, now I'm racking my brain. There was a reason that I actually had it work because I do think I actually have super secret special code in there that it adds that automatically. Yeah, I think if you look at the script feedback provider, I actually stick that in there so that if you did that, it will still work. It actually does add the using namespace to effect. We can look here. Yeah, see, so right here, before the thing actually gets executed, I actually stick that line on there. So if you didn't do the whole thing, it'll already be there for you. So because there's no way to bring that. You can't, using statements always have to be at the top of the script, so you can't stick a using right here. And so I was like, well, how do I fix that? I'm like, well, I could just inject it. It doesn't hurt anything if you didn't use it. So so we got this. First, we'll make sure my loopy thingy works. Okay, so now so what I'm doing is that, again, because I'm just using that command, so now we're just registering it twice with the feedback loop, once for error and once for success. And ideally, you wouldn't have to do that, but hassle that guy in the back of the room if that's what you want. Okay, so we have that, and so we know that part's working. We got it on the command line. Oh, you know what? I can't remember if when you throw an error, I think maybe the command line doesn't get populated. It's only in the error details. You might only get the AST, I can't remember. Let's find out. So, oh no, we tested that earlier, that it wasn't that. So this is looking good. So let's just do, if the context looks like that, throw. Okay, good. So, well, it should be working. So now all we got to do is make this feedback item nicer. Say? Oh, fed back item, thank you. That's why I use my control. I didn't use my control space, and I should have. As you can tell, I am like cripplingly reliant on IntelliSense, and it's probably the main reason I got so involved in the VS Code extension is to make sure that works. Because if it's not there, it's like yeah, not having IntelliSense is like programming without a net for me these days. Like people are like, I just do it in Notepad. I'm like, are you insane? I guess I'm just not a 100x engineer yet. Like just last week, I only had to be a 10x engineer. I thought that was hard. Now she's telling me I got to be a 100x engineer? Man, it's brutal. All right, so get a comma in there. Take that out. Yes, all right, there we go. So there we go. So we did yeah, thank you. And just to prove, not send mail message. Oh, because we had it triggering on success anyways. Oh, no, because I did I didn't, yeah, whatever. So if you were doing this proper, and maybe, again, if we have time, we could do the AST way, where ideally you would be breaking down the AST and doing a find that the function that was used was send mail message. And that would prevent you from things where somebody has send mail message in a string or that kind of thing. That's why the AST is so great, is because all those, if you use regex, then you got to account for all those situations. If you use the AST, all that's been figured out for you. So, so what I do also want to show is that we can do, if it's in a script, I guess if we did context command line, you'd have to find it there. But so I think, can't remember if I set mine up so you can return multiple feedback items or not. I think maybe you can. Let's find out. Bounce. No, okay, so this one will only take the last feedback item you send. I made it so it didn't freak out on that. But there is a way, oh, no, I know why. It's because this second parameter is an array. So you have your top header that is like your feedback that you're providing. And like, if you have a feedback provider that needs to provide like multiple things, like it could do this and then that and then this, it's usually best to make each one of those a separate feedback provider, as opposed to trying to do all that work in here. Because you can pretty much only return one sort of like header message here, but then the individual items that are under it can be more detailed. Your header message could also be general, and then your individual items is like, your header message is going to be, we found these issues, and then each individual item can have the detail of the thing. So it really just depends on what style you want your message to be. But I'll just show here real quick. When you use an array, bounce. Am I not getting my first message there? Oh, it's because I'm not. It's because of the success thing there, I think. There we go. So you see here, like I have the items in the array, and so you have that, and then you have the first line, but then the additional lines that I put in there as part of that array, you can have as additional items. So if you had something like was looking at a whole script, and like, so if you the graph one that I had, if you paste in a script block, it doesn't work with the dot sourcing as previously mentioned, but if you paste it in a script block and it had like 3 or 4 places where you needed to use consistency level eventual, it would, like, these arrows would be each one of those places where you did it, where you need to change it and fix it, so that you don't just have to rerun it over and over again to find that. All right, well, we did it. So there we have your. So now a part of this would be is like, now you can't overwrite the warning. So like you can't, as a script feedback provider, like if that warning's already there, these are all just net new. So you can't intercept or do any kind of, it always happens after the script is run. So you can't like intercept an existing warning and fix it. You can't do anything with an error. Any of that kind of stuff you pretty much would have to do with like try catch around whatever the action is and then rewrite it as you need to. Yeah. So the question is, as far as the feedback providers, are they permanent or do they have to be loaded every time for a session? So the answer is they have to be loaded every time for a session because they register. So part of the process is that if we go to, we'll look at it at the C# level here, if I go to the graph provider. So again, this MGAQ detect, this is also on my GitHub. And so if you want to see like the way to write like a quote unquote proper C# one, the way the PowerShell team originally intended before I got crazy and made a script version, I consider this a pretty good example. And I actually have my own custom little AST query tools here. So this test advanced query needed, this primarily does most of the work. And this is where that AST stuff comes in. So in my part, you have the context, it gets the AST. I'm not answering your question right now, but I'll get to it, I promise. I just think this is cool. And then I use link, which is, link is sort of like where object pipelining in PowerShell. It's just it's a way to like enumerate through things really easy with a really terse syntax. And so I'm saying, so that find all and then the brackets command parameter AST, that's what's called a generic function. Don't worry about what that means. It just simply means that when I do the AST, I'm just doing it really quickly. Hey, find commands in the AST. And that short little line, I don't have to do any regexing, I don't have to do any parsing. It's just find all the things that the PowerShell engine thinks is a command, whether it's ping or get command or search whatever. And in those, then select, I want to make sure that the parameter, they have a parameter that says parameter name, make it a list because I need a list for the rest of this. And then I go through the parameter. So if the parameter already has consistency level and count variable, then I don't need to, even if the rest of it's not right, you've already done the thing that I'm recommending you to do. So I can bail out early, hence the return false or true. But if it has like both filter and order by, then like that's something that I need to do an advanced query on. Otherwise, whatever the text was doesn't match, and so I bail out. And so that's sort of like the core logic of how I'm finding which commands to fix. Yeah, it would. And I'll go into that and I'll repeat and go into that for a second, but I probably should answer the last person's question before I go off on another tangent. So if you go here into the feedback provider, we get down here, and I do promise like my light theme is much easier to read, or my dark theme is much easier to read, but these projectors aren't great. So this section right here, If you're writing a C# module, this is just a special piece in PowerShell. We keep talking about interfaces again. Interfaces are just these contracts. So PowerShell can establish this contract. Say, hey, if you implement this contract, here are these very specific methods you have to put in. But if you implement that, then I will call those, at the appropriate times, and you can do whatever you need to. So one of those contracts is called iModuleAssembly Initializer and iModuleAssembly Cleanup. So I have a class that implements these, and those two interfaces, again, these definitions should work? No, okay, whatever. That basically it says you have to implement this method and this method. So on import, that just simply means when the module gets loaded, when I do import module on your module, if it's a C# module, PowerShell has code in it that says, okay, if this module has implemented the on iModuleAssembly Initializer interface, then call that on import module. And then the module basically allows the module to do some startup stuff. And then on remove. So on that startup, this is where I'm registering a subsystem, which is a framework that's in PowerShell for doing all this kind of stuff. Like the big ultimate goal would be is that so much of PowerShell, like all the remotings engine, all that stuff can come actually out of the core PowerShell and have all of them be registered as subsystems. And that way, like the core PowerShell can be like Bash or that kind of thing, where it can be like really, really small. I doubt that'll happen in the next 5 years, but it's one of the like big pie in the sky goals. But this uses that same framework. So the framework's there to do that. Now all those pieces just have to be like ripped out and put into that subsystem framework. But what you're doing is you're registering one of those components with PowerShell, and you're registering of the type feedback provider. And you can see their provider is actually an instance of my provider that I've created here. And so, look, I even added comments because I'm a good citizen. So that's how the module loads. And so what happens is that you're basically registering and unregistering. And when you run when you're doing the script version of mine, when you do that register - command on the underside, I'm just doing this. I'm making a brand new. I have a sort of like a dynamic like feedback provider builder that takes your script block and puts it in the run space, and then it registers it with this. And then when you do unregister, it takes it out there. And I realized in my script provider, when you load and unload that module, or if you force reload it, I need to modify that so it cleans it up. It currently doesn't do any cleanup, so you might get like some redundancies in there. But so yeah, basically that's how you do it. So the recommended ways to do this would be is that if you have it as a module and like you always want it present, then you should just put in your profile. Put in your profile, just import the module. If it's the script-based provider, then you can do it one of two ways. You can either just write it like that, or you can do it like I did it here, where you can make it a module, where if you're writing a PowerShell module like this, if you don't put things in functions, then that code executes on import. The whole thing executes on import. Most of the time, you're just importing functions. So by putting the register just in the code, then it runs at the time that you import it. So excuse me. So that's how you can make it so that they start up and not. So in terms of like deploying this to users, like you would have to put it in their profile, or you would have to, if you have a separate module that you want to always have certain feedback providers, you can include those feedback providers as dependencies in your module, and then they'll import automatically the second somebody runs one of your commands, and then they'll be present. But otherwise, the only way to make sure that they're running 100% all the time would probably be to put it in the profile. Oh, yeah. Okay, so the question was, another question about this was, when you do the command AST, and we can demo that here, when you do the, so in my steps here, like when I was sorting through this, it was mentioned earlier, is like you have command line AST, but if the command line AST was somebody like sourcing a script, then all you see as the command line is this script. In fact, I'll demo that here in a second. So the question was that, well, since you know what the script is, can't you just then go and then get the content of the script, parse that with the AST parser, and then still do the same result? And the answer is yes, you could do that. The tricky thing is like, where do you stop with that? If that script sources stuff, do you do that? And then at what point do you start hitting 100 milliseconds? So I think that just comes down to the contract that your feedback provider is. I think it makes reasonable sense to delve at least once. And I might, like for instance, with this script feedback provider, maybe I'll add an option to it to say, when you register your provider, do you want it to at least delve one level if it was a .source script? But don't go all the way into modules and stuff, So yeah, it's certainly something you could do. There's no reason you couldn't. The only other issue I could think of, well, no, you'd still be, because if with the error, you would still be able to correlate the error, because as long as it's a dot source script and not like a dynamic whatever generated thing, that error is still going to point to that physical location on disk where that script is. So when you dot source it and parse it, you'll still be able to report it based on that error and point it to the right line. So yeah, so I would say, yeah, you probably absolutely could. I mean, again, we have plenty of time. We could try it. We could try building it. Yeah.
Is it bad form if you have a feedback provider to auto-load it with your module?
I don't think so. I think that I think it would depend on the feedback provider. If your feedback provider runs every time on success, yeah, that's probably like don't do that. You know, I think that like it's my view that like with the graph module, like my graph advanced query search, I feel like that's something that should ship in Microsoft Graph. So like when you're running it, like, you know, you're able to provide the user with better feedback about like certain scenarios that may not be, again, it was a perfect example of this, and was why I made it, is like they don't want to change the behavior of the command. They don't want the command to error and give you a better error message that doesn't come from the API. Like their whole philosophy is with those is that, you know, it's the Microsoft Graph SDK. It's not the Microsoft Graph user-friendly PowerShell module, which, you know, we may all disagree with because, you know, but their approach is like, hey, we auto-generated this. We treat this like it's an SDK, and we expect the community to make the nice modules that have all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we may disagree with that approach, but that's their approach, and I understand. So doing something like that, like offering more info in the error message, would be changing the error message that comes from the API, and that goes against their philosophy. And I can understand that, because now it's just another thing you have to support, and they got a big enough surface as it is today. But I think in the end, I think for a lot of things, if they are things that really help, and especially with like error messages that you don't control or you don't want to rewrite, or especially like getting started stuff, I think would be really good. Like for your connect command, if they just type connect and like they don't add anything, you could give them examples. You know, you could be like, here's an example of like maybe how you use connect, and like then go to the examples in the command kind of a thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's my opinion is like, in my opinion, because you can try catch those errors and the exception can still be preserved, but you can rewrite the error record part with error details. Like my process, I usually rewrite error details with that additional information, and then but still include the original message. If you own the module, I feel like that's the best approach. But if you if it's somebody else, like feedback providers are especially useful because you can do that for other people's modules, even if they don't do it, and that's why I use the graph as an example. I think that probably has, again, this is an experimental feature still. There's plenty of stuff that can change in the future, and feel free to submit your feedback on the issues that exist in the PowerShell forums. So as 7.5, et cetera, you know, they go. But my opinion is like, you know, if you can adjust the error message yourself, do it. Otherwise, feedback providers are a good option. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and hope you try out feedback providers.